Hello and welcome to this video and to January's book review, and welcome to my new house. Currently I have literally just finished work for the day. I thought I would film at my new snazzy desk chair, which I am very much enjoying because if you didn't know, I have spent the last 2 and a bit years. Is that how long we've been in? 2 years? Whatever it is. Sat on a dining room chair and it's not been the most comfortable, and now I have this snazzy thing, so yeah, excited about that. This is January's book review. I've spent the month reading on my Kindle because if you didn't know and you haven't guessed from some of the videos that have already come out, we went on our honeymoon. I say went because this is now late January. I think we're on the 20 something, I don't actually know what the date is, of January. We have been and come back, but those vlogs will be coming up on Sunday for you. The first one is our travel day and the first couple of days in Barbados, but it was a nice little Wednesday for me to sneak in a little January book review, but that's why I was reading on my Kindle for the month. So the first book I'm going to talk about I actually finished in December, but I didn't manage to fit it into my December wrap up because of all of the timings. If you want to know what I'm talking about, I'll link that video up there for you in case you're interested. But I read The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. And this is a Christmas book. It follows two twins, Charlie and Cass, who both have a love of baking. Charlie is like a celebrity. She's currently a judge on a TV baking show, and her twin sister Cass is helping run her family's bakery in a smaller town. But Cass ends up having major concussion and losing her sense of taste and smell, which obviously being a judge on a baking show, bit of a problem. So she convinces her twin sister Cass, who's also going through some issues of her own in her life, she convinces her to swap places like they did when they were younger, a bit like The Parent Trap, which my brother keeps slating the film, but the Lindsay Lohan film is great, and they essentially take on each other's lives. I enjoyed the book. It was an easy Christmas read. I liked some of the festivity parts of it. I have to say I preferred Cass's storyline to Charlie's. I thought Charlie was a bit selfish, I guess. Like, she convinces her sister to swap places and then essentially leaves her to it, even though she promised that she'd help and things like that. The only way I can really explain this book is it would probably make quite a good Hallmark film where it's such predictable storylines but you enjoy them anyway. This book was like that. I like the fact that you had a dual perspective, so you got to hear from both Charlie and Cass and, you know, suffer through secondary cringe for both of those, because some of the situations and some of the ways that they had to essentially lie to everyone around them because they're pretending to be the other one, it makes for some cringe-worthy reading. And obviously there was lots of lovely food descriptions about different cakes and things like that, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And lastly, there was a character called Faye, which is an unusual thing to happen in a book, and of course she was an 87-year-old woman, because of course she was. I think she should have appeared more in the book, not just because she was called Faye, but she was the sort of voice of reason throughout most of the story. So yeah, on the whole, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was enjoyable. It was kind of predictable. Kind of what you want for a Christmas book. But I'm sure, and I'm pretty sure I've read better Christmas books, but it was still fun and a good way to end the reading year. So the first book I picked up actually in January was The Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I've heard a lot about this book and how the ending is really bad, so it's always intrigued me to know why and whether I agree. This is essentially a survival story. We are with our main character, whose name I've forgotten, Hetty. We're with our main character, Hetty, through most of it. There are some chapters told by her best friend, who's called Byatt. I'm going to call her Byatt. But largely we're with Hetty. They attend a girls' school like girls' boarding school on this like remote island, and that remote island has been quarantined because they've got some sort of illness which comes out in each of the girls in different ways. Content warnings for like body horror in this book. There's some quite graphic descriptions of how this illness has changed some of their bodies, shall we say. I would say that the world building in this took quite a long time to take place, and I can't say I fully understood everything. And I think that the book was supposed to have some sort of moral and some sort of message at the end of it, which completely passed me by as well. And I didn't have an issue with the ending. I thought it fit with the story quite well. I just didn't overly get on with the story. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars, which is still a good rating for me. It means that it was sort of fine. There were parts that I enjoyed, there were parts that I didn't. I think it probably took too long, really. I think they could have made it a much quicker read and moving between things, and I don't think they needed to linger on some of the stuff that they did for quite the amount of time that they did. I preferred, and because of that, I preferred Byatt's chapters. I felt they were much quicker paced, a lot more happened, and they were a lot more interesting. She was also a more interesting character to be in the brain of, more so than Hetty. But yeah, I'm not sure I should have read it on our honeymoon when we were on an island in the middle of the sea, but I've been intrigued by the book for so long that it felt like the right time to pick it up. And as I said, I did enjoy bits of it, but there were parts that I definitely would have changed. So because I had just finished Wilder Girls and I knew what book I was going to go on to next, which is also quite a heavy book, or sort of not particularly fluffy themes for a honeymoon, I went on to Dumped Actually by Nick Spalding. I've read a couple of his books, Fat Chance and Bricking It, and they're normally amusing, funny elements of sort of romance and that kind of thing to it. I think he largely is based on the Amazon Kindle store. I think that's where most of his things are published. I don't know. I've never actually seen them physically. But I thought this would be a good book to be a nice cleanser in between the 2 books that I was going to read, because I knew it would make me laugh. And it did. So this followed our main character, whose name I haven't written down on my notes, so I've no idea what his name was. But our main character, he's a journalist, but more to the point is that right at the beginning of the book, he proposes to his girlfriend and she declines. She says no, and his proposal is so outlandish that it's not only upsetting, it's also incredibly embarrassing. So from there, he then writes a column about his heartbreak and asks for people to send in ways to get over heartbreak, and he will then try them out, which puts him in a lot of unusual situations. And it being a Nick Spalding book, he takes those situations further than you would think. If you've read it, I'm just going to say the deer and you'll probably understand what I'm talking about. So this one, you really do suffer from secondhand cringe, like throughout the book. You're wincing but laughing at the same time, and I did chuckle at a number of occasions with this book. The way that it was set up is that between every, let's say, 3 chapters, I can't remember if it's exactly that or not, you would have like an interlude where you read the emails from the people giving their suggestions to how he can get over the heartbreak. But that does then make the next section of chapters kind of predictable. You know what the events are going to be because you've read the emails. Now, I don't know how you would have changed that, because even if you put the email at the beginning of the chapter, that would still have the same impact. And I didn't hate it, but I also didn't like the fact that I knew exactly where the next section of the book was going to go. And lastly, as we were talking about endings with Wilder Girls, this one didn't go quite in the way that I was expecting. It wasn't a nice, fluffy wrap it up in a bow, which actually I preferred. I think the ending was the right one for this book. So in the end, I settled on a 4-star, more because of that predictability element of it. But it was definitely a book that made me laugh a lot. and it ended up being my favourite book of the month. So from my favourite book of the month to my absolute least favourite book of the month, and a book, I don't think I've read a book this bad in quite a while, and that was Deathloop by Brailey. So I'm taking part in Buzzwordathon this year. I've decided that I'm going to do it, and the first prompt was to read a book with the words life or death in the title. So I came on my little because I'm sad, little book spreadsheet. I filtered it to try and find any books with life or death in the title, and Deathloop was the only one that I have. So I knew that in January at some point I was going to have to read this book. I'm just curious, so bear with me one moment as I turn away from you slightly. I was just curious as to when I actually bought this. Right. So I got this on the 6th of January in 2013. So I obviously got this book for free and was one of the first ones I chucked onto my Kindle when I got excited about free books, not knowing that often they're not that great. Although to be fair, some of the free books that I have read, there have been some crackers in there, so that's probably unfair. But the way I read the blurb of this was that there's a man called Zach Fortune. He's like the most charismatic, beautiful person in the world, and like everything that he wants happens. And then something happens. He has some past life regression therapy or whatever it is to help a friend out. And there's an event there that then means that at points throughout the next however long, there is a person that dies, and when they die, they call out for him to help. And it keeps happening, and he doesn't know why. That is not really the premise of the book, because that sounds interesting, and what I read was not interesting. Zach Fortune is the most irritating character ever. I don't normally, use curse words on my channel, but Zach Fortune is a complete and utter arse. He is an utter tool, and I found it very hard to feel any sympathy for him or anything for him other than just, you're not very nice. So going into that with that mentality anyway made it very difficult to care about the fact that there were some horrendous events going on in his life, and people keep dying in front of him. It's not pleasant, and you should feel a bit sorry for him and hope that he manages to figure it out, but I didn't care. I found the whole book was incredibly drawn out, and the whole point of the death loop, as in people keep dying in front of him and they're calling his name just before they die, that was brushed over. It happened, but it was brushed over. I think at points Brailey forgot that was supposed to be the premise of this book. And yeah, I don't recommend it at all. Don't read it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So I knew I needed to go to a book that was from an author that I've read before, I know I enjoy, etc., etc. So I read The Sun in Her Eyes by Paige Toon. Again, I've read quite a lot of Paige Toon. In the end, I gave this one 3.5 stars. I really enjoy the way that Paige Toon writes. I know I'm going to read the book relatively quickly and I'm going to enjoy it. However, going into this one, I knew I possibly wouldn't enjoy it as much as some of her others. And certainly the one I read in summer, which was, what was that one called? The Minute I Saw You, I think I did enjoy that one more, but that's because of the premise of The Sun in Her Eyes. We follow a woman. She's living in the UK, originally from Australia. Her mum dies in a car accident when she's in the car as a small child. That really impacts her dad. So her growing up has not been great. So she flees to the UK, but she gets a phone call from her dad's partner to say that he's had a stroke and that kind of thing. So she goes back to Australia to help there. She's having issues with her husband anyway, so blah, 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 blah. She has a childhood friend who she's always had a crush on, so that they're essentially going to cheat, and I don't like books where people cheat. I don't see why we have to have a husband and things like that. If you want the whole childhood romance thing, why does somebody else have to suffer because of it? But that's my own opinion on the trope. I mean, I still read the trope, but I know that I'm never going to give that one a 5 stars because I don't like that part of it. And again, unfortunately, I've got her name. Her name's Amber. And unfortunately, again, I found her a bit selfish in the decisions that she was making, not only because she was a cheater, but some other things that she did. I found her a bit selfish, but ultimately the book was relatively emotional. Obviously, we're looking at a death of a parent, and there's a whole sort of plot line of the woman that found the crash is now in her 80s or something and really wants to share the last words of Amber's mum with Amber. So she's trying to track her down, so that's it. And actually, that bit was a bit of a flop, but the bits around it were good. I'm not selling this book very well. I guess it was a 3.5 star, so it's good, but there were lots of things that I could have changed about it. So not the Paige Toon I would recommend. I think there are much better Paige Toon books, but still enjoyable and much better, and a nice palate cleanser after Deathloop. The last book that I read this month was a non-fiction. I'm not doing that this year, I just fancied reading it. So I read Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. This is looking at what they class as the manosphere, which was a new term to me, but we're looking at pick-up artistry and incels and trolls and things like that, and how that is spreading, and what can be done about it and things like that. The reason I picked this book up is because I got angry after reading about the David Carrick case, who was the Met policeman who has he been convicted or has he been charged? I can't remember which one. I think it's charged with several rapes in the Hertfordshire area. So that angered me. So I wanted to read an angry feminist book. This wasn't an angry feminist book, to be fair, but it was very interesting in looking at all the different they're large sections, but sections of the internet that you don't think are linked, but then you look at their ideologies and they are all basically the same. So where the media and various other factors of life don't want to talk about white supremacy and misogyny and all of that kind of stuff as a terrorist act and things like that, there are so many examples where it is, and it's very scary after reading that book how quickly the ideas can become more extreme and how easy it is for people to fall into this world and become sucked up into it. That being said, though, I found it a very hard read, not because of the topic, although that had an element, just because of, I guess, how it's written. Obviously, Laura Bates is incredibly brave in writing this book, just because of the sheer backlash and death threats and horrible stuff that she has probably received after writing this book. But because of that, it is researched to the death, so it makes it a little bit dry. You go through each of the chapters and they follow a same sort of pattern. It gets a bit samey. Not that the information is not interesting, but yeah, it just was quite difficult to read in one go. I think if I was a person that could just dip in and out of a book, this might have been the one to do it with. Read a chapter, move away from it for a little bit, read something else for a little bit, move back and go from read a chapter. I, however, am not that kind of reader. I can't do that. I have to just sit and finish a book. Yeah, it did become a bit of a chore, but I'm glad I read it. It was a very interesting subject matter to delve into for a little bit. So that was Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates, and that was the last book that I read in January. So not my best reading month in terms of, star rating level, but definitely some interesting ones and some ones that will stay with me for good or bad reasons for however long to come. And I'm looking forward to What's to come in February? I think our buzzwordathon prompt is a doing word, so we have to find something with a verb. So I've been thinking about that. I mean, I could just read all books that have verbs in it. We'll see. We'll see what I decide. And if you're interested in what book I end up picking or what I think of what I'm reading, go ahead and subscribe. But if you enjoyed this one, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, don't forget, Sunday the honeymoon vlogs are starting. So, bye!